It's been a few days since we last shared an experience on this channel. The reason is simple. Our team has made a firm decision to always seek the face of God concerning any experience we intend to share. Once we receive confirmation, we will share it. What you are about to watch has been confirmed and discerned to be true. And in truth, what has been revealed will begin to happen just as it was revealed. That is why we are sharing this now, so that you and your family can be prepared. Now, please tell us where you are watching from so we can pray along with you tonight as we gather to seek God's guidance for the next experience to share. My name is James Mitchell. I am a Navy SEAL with 23 years of service to this nation. I need to say this first, and I mean this with every fiber of my being. I am not a crazy man. I am not someone looking for attention or trying to start a panic. I am a trained military officer with a security clearance and a reputation to protect. Everything I am about to share will sound impossible to you. I understand that. I would have thought the same thing 6 months ago. But I have been given a responsibility that weighs on me like nothing I have carried in my entire military career, and I cannot stay silent about it any longer. This message is going to reach many people in ways I cannot control. It will surprise them. It will confuse them. And I know that some of you who are hearing this right now, this warning is directly meant for you. This is for every American citizen watching. This concerns you and your family. This concerns your future and the future of those you love. I could have chosen to keep quiet. That would have been easier. That would have been safer for me personally. But staying quiet would have made me a coward, and I have never been a coward in my life. You see, what I am about to reveal to you, in normal circumstances, this information would never reach the public. The government would keep it contained. The military would classify it. The reason they would do this is clear. They know that if people understood what was coming, there would be panic. And panic leads to chaos. Chaos leads to people making desperate choices that cause even greater harm than the event itself. I understand all of this. I know the reasoning. I know why information like this gets locked away in secure vaults and why officials feel the need to control what the public knows. But I am choosing to tell you anyway, not to create panic, not to frighten you into doing something foolish. I am telling you this because you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to have time to prepare. You deserve to gather your family and make decisions that could mean the difference between survival and loss. A few hours of warning might not seem like much, but it is everything when it comes to protecting the people you love most. In my military experience, I have learned that advanced warning can save lives. Lives are lost because people do not know what is coming. I cannot let that happen here. What happened to me was not a near-death experience, not technically. I want to be clear about that from the start. It was more like a trance or maybe a vision or something that exists between both. It was real. I know what I experienced was real, but it did not come through my body dying and coming back. It came through prayer, deep, desperate prayer. And that matters, I think. That changes what it means. I love God. This needs to be said clearly because my whole life has been about service, and that service flows from something deeper than duty. I love Jesus Christ. I love the body of Christ, the church, the believers everywhere who are trying to live their faith in a world that keeps pushing against it. One of the things I have always wanted more than anything is to have the kind of relationship with God where He speaks to you directly, where you hear His voice, where you see visions and receive guidance from heaven itself. That is something I have deeply desired all my life. But my work does not give me much time for that. My duty as a SEAL is constant. The missions come when they come. The training never really stops. There are long stretches where I cannot get away to pray or seek God's face the way I want to. I have had to accept that my closeness to God is something I build in small moments between operations. A few minutes in the morning, before dawn, a prayer while in the vehicle, a moment of connection while everyone else is sleeping. It is not ideal, but it is what my service has demanded. Then came the second week of April. I attended church service that Sunday morning, and something about that day hit me differently. The message was powerful. The pastor spoke about a God who is not distant and cold, but who is actively warning His people, who is moving in the world to protect those who belong to Him. He talked about believers in ancient times who received divine warnings about coming judgment, and how those warnings allowed them to escape and be preserved for God's purposes. I sat in that church service and something inside me became very still and very focused. I could feel the Holy Spirit speaking to my spirit, not in words exactly, but in that deep knowing that comes from God when He wants to get your attention. I knew I needed to pray. I knew I needed to decide God's face about something, though I did not know what. It was like being called, but I did not know what I was being called to yet. After the service ended, I did not leave right away like I usually do. I stayed in the empty sanctuary and I went to my knees. I began to pray in a way I had not prayed in a long time. I was seeking God. Not asking for something specific, just seeking, wanting Him to speak, wanting to understand what His Spirit had stirred in me during the message. I cannot tell you how long I was on my knees. Time felt different. My mind became very quiet. All the noise of my daily life, all the operational thinking and tactical awareness, it all fell away. It was just me and God in that sanctuary. And then something happened. The heavens opened. I am not speaking this in some poetic way. The heavens literally opened. I looked up, and the roof of that church was not there anymore. I was looking straight into heaven, and what I saw there made my breath stop in my chest. The air around me changed completely. It became charged with something I had never felt before, something electric and holy and terrifying all at the same time. My lungs forgot how to work for a moment. My mind could not process what my eyes were seeing. 32 angels descended toward me. Each one held a sword that was burning with fire so bright I should not have been able to see anything else, but somehow I could. The light did not hurt my eyes. It was pure and clean. These were warriors of God. I could feel that about them. These were not gentle, soft beings. These were the armies of heaven. And they all came down to where I was on my knees. The sound of their descent was not a sound I can fully describe in human language. It was like wind, but it was also like silence. It was like the moment before thunder, when the air holds its breath. I stood up because I felt like I had to. I could not stay on my knees once I saw what I was seeing. My body moved on its own. And when I stood, I saw that all 32 angels were not looking at me. They were looking in a different direction. Their faces were all turned the same way, focused on something I could not see at first. There was a collective intentionality about them that was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. They were not distracted. They were not uncertain. Every single one of them was locked onto something with absolute focus and absolute purpose. I turned to see what they were looking at. There was what looked like a large screen, or maybe a window, hanging in the air in front of us. And in front of that screen, arranged in a straight line, were drums. 14 drums in total. I do not know why there were exactly 14. The angels did not explain that to me. And I did not understand at that moment why there were 32 angels. These were numbers that seemed to have meaning, but no one told me what that meaning was. I just knew what I was seeing. The drums were not ordinary drums. They were ancient in appearance. They seemed to carry weight beyond their physical form. Looking at them, I felt a heaviness, a solemnity, as if each one contained something significant, something final. One of the angels, the one who seemed to lead the others, he stepped forward. I understood that this one was the leader, though nothing was said to tell me that. I just knew it the way you know things in visions. You understand things without being told them. This angel was different from the rest, not in size or in the brightness of his sword, but in the authority that surrounded him. When he moved, the other 31 moved slightly in response, like the way a field of wheat responds when a wind passes through it. There was a gravity to his presence that commanded attention from every being in that space. This leader angel held a scroll in his hands. The scroll was old-looking and seemed heavy with importance. He unrolled it and began to read from it. His voice was like thunder, but not harsh, just powerful. And as he read, I understood that he was reading judgments. These were judgments of God that were coming upon the earth. Each word he spoke landed in the air with weight. Each sentence settled like stone. There was no emotion in his voice the way we think of emotion, but there was something deeper than emotion. There was gravity. There was the weight of eternal things being spoken into the temporal world. As soon as the leader angel read the first judgment, the first drum fell. When it fell, it opened, and what came out was ashes. Just ashes. I did not understand what the ashes meant, but they poured out like something precious was being lost. The ashes did not scatter randomly. They fell in a deliberate way, as if even in their falling, they were following some divine order, some pattern that had meaning I could not yet read. The second drum fell. More ashes. The third drum fell. Ashes again. The fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh drums all fell one after another as the leader angel read from his scroll. Each one opened and released ashes. And I stood there watching this, and I felt something like grief, like watching something being destroyed. Something that had been whole was being reduced. Something that had been living was being returned to dust. The grief I felt watching those drums fall was not a passing feeling. It settled deep in my chest and stayed there. It was the grief of irreversible things, the grief of doors closing that once were open. The eighth drum fell. The same thing. Ashes poured out. But then the leader angel read about the ninth drum, and everything changed. All 32 angels moved forward together. They came close to where the ninth drum was positioned, and they all took what I can only describe as a fighting posture. They were ready. They were braced. Every single one of them was tense and prepared for something. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. One moment there had been solemnity and heaviness. Now there's something sharper, something more urgent. The air crackled with a kind of tension that I felt in my body, in my chest, behind my eyes. I was confused. I did not understand why. I asked out loud, "What is happening? Why are you already like that? Why this drum?" And that is when the leader angel began to explain to me what he was reading from the scroll about the ninth drum. When I heard what was written there, I finally understood why all 32 of them needed to be ready for battle. The leader angel revealed to me that God's judgments were coming upon the earth in different locations across the globe. These judgments were not because God hates mankind. That was something he made very clear to me. God does not hate his creation. But the activities of men, the choices that people have made, the sins that nations have committed, these things have opened doors. These doors have given the devil access to carry out his evil intentions. He showed me that these evil intentions had been waiting since before the foundation of the earth. They had been there all along, waiting for the moment when humanity would open the doors wide enough for them to come through. The devil had not created new plans. He had simply been waiting, patient, watching, looking for the moment when the doors would swing open wide enough for him to walk through. The angel, those doors were opened to me that each of the first 8 drums marked 15 days. So 8 drums meant 4 months of judgment coming. The 9th drum signified the first 15 days of the month of May, and what was coming in that time would usher in a mighty disaster. The timeline was precise. The accounting was exact. Heaven was not speaking in vague generalities. Heaven was speaking in specific increments, in measured intervals, in counted days. There was nothing casual about what the scroll contained. Everything was noted, everything was dated, everything was known. This is where I understood why the 32 angels were taking a fighting position. The angels standing before me, the leader revealed to me, were not random spiritual beings. They were the guardian angels of America. They had been assigned to America as their nation. Their job was to work with intercessors, with people who pray, to stop this coming disaster from happening. These angels had a long history with this nation. They had been present at its founding. They had watched it grow and struggled and prosper. They had seen its best days and its worst days. They had never abandoned their post. Even now, even in this moment when the doors had been opened by human choices, they had not walked away. They were still there, still positioned, still fighting. The leader angel showed me that every nation on earth had the same number of guardian angels assigned to them. 32 angels for each nation. This was their assignment for this season. They were positioned now, waiting to partner with the believers who would intercede in prayer. The number was not arbitrary, it was deliberate. Each nation, regardless of its size or its power or its history, received the same complement of guardians. God's system was not partial. His protection was made available to all nations equally. The question was always whether the people of those nations would partner with the angels through prayer. But before the leader angel revealed the specific disaster that was coming, he spoke to me about the 3 sins that had opened the door for all of this to happen. The angel revealed that these sins were not small things, they were foundational things. They had cracked the spiritual protection that had been over this nation since its founding. I want to be careful to describe these the way the angel described them to me, because each one carried a specific weight, a specific significance, and I do not want to reduce them by being careless in how I tell what I was shown. The first sin he revealed to me was that America, as a nation, had stopped regarding the things of God. The nation was supposed to uphold the Lord and his principles for living. Instead, the nation had chosen to embrace the way of Baal and the way of Mammon. These are old words for old things, but they mean the same thing now as they always have. Baal represents the worship of things other than God. Mammon represents the worship of money and material power. The nation had been called by God to be different, to guide other nations toward God through the standard that America set. But the nation had failed in this calling. Instead of showing the world what it looks like to follow God's principles, America had turned away. The turning had not happened all at once. It had been gradual. It had been incremental. One compromise followed another. One generation drifted a little further than the last. And now the nation stood at a place so far from where it had started that many of its own people did not even recognize how far the drift had gone. The angel explained to me that this was a serious matter. When a nation is given a calling by God, when a nation is blessed with resources and power and influence, there comes a responsibility. America was supposed to use its position in the world to point people toward God. America was supposed to demonstrate what a nation looks like when it is built on God's principles. America was supposed to be a light to other nations, showing them the way to truth and righteousness. But that had not happened. The light had dimmed. The standard had been lowered. The calling had been exchanged for comfort and convenience. Instead, America had become known for many things that were the opposite of God's way. The nation had become known for excessive materialism, for the pursuit of pleasure and comfort, for the worship of entertainment and wealth. The nation had become known for spreading ideas that contradicted God's design for human relationships and families. The nation had become known for self-centeredness and the pursuit of individual desire over community and God's purpose. And the rest of the world had watched this and had learned to follow the same path. The export of these things had been just as powerful as the export of its goods and its technology. America had sent its rebellion against God's order into every corner of the world through its media, through its culture, through its influence, and the world had received it. The angel showed me how younger nations looked to America as an example. He showed me how when America embraced things that were contrary to God, other nations followed. He showed me how America's influence had spread sin and rebellion across the globe. The responsibility was heavy. America was supposed to lead the world toward God, but instead it had led the world away from Him. The angel's face, as he showed me these things, was not full of anger. It was full of something closer to sorrow, like a soldier who has watched a city fall that he was assigned to protect. There was grief in what he was showing me, not just judgment. The second sin was deeper and more systemic. The angel revealed to me that the nation had created and was upholding principles and policies that violated God's standard. These were not accidental failures. These were deliberate choices to build systems that went against the way God had designed things to work. I felt the weight of this as I heard it. The word deliberate carried particular force. There is a difference between stumbling into sin and constructing systems to perpetuate it. What the angel was showing me was the latter. I saw 3 specific examples of this. First, the nation had put in place policies that attacked the structure of the family, which is the foundation God created for society. The angel showed me how laws had been written and systems had been put in place that undermined parental authority and weakened the bonds between parents and children. Children were being taught to question their parents' values. Parental rights were being reduced. The family structure itself was being deliberately weakened. The attack on the family was not presented to the public as an attack. It was presented as progress. It was presented as liberation. It was presented as protection for the children. But the angel showed me the true nature of what was happening. Behind the language of liberation was a deliberate dismantling of the structure God had designed from the beginning of creation. He showed me schools where children were encouraged to see their parents as obstacles to their personal growth. He showed me systems where the government could step in and remove children from their parents based on the child's claims about how they were being treated. He showed me policies that allowed children to access medical treatments without their parents' knowledge or permission. The family, which God had ordained as the first institution and the basic unit of society, was under systematic attack. I watched as the angel showed me this, and my heart broke thinking of families being torn apart. I thought of the parents who had given everything to raise their children in the faith, only to have systems designed to pull those children away from the values and the bonds that held them together. The grief in that vision was enormous. Second, I saw policies that had legalized and promoted things that God had always called sin. The nation was not just tolerating these things, it was celebrating them and forcing citizens to participate in celebrating them. People who held to traditional biblical values were being pressured, threatened, and punished for not affirming what went against their faith. This was one of the most sobering things the angel showed me, because it revealed how completely the situation had reversed. What had once been the standard was now the offense. What had once been called virtue was now called hate. The moral framework of the nation had been turned upside down, and then the upside-down framework had been written into law and enforced. The angel showed me how sin that had once been hidden in shame was now being paraded in the streets with celebration and government support. He showed me how people who disagreed with these things were being labeled as hateful and intolerant. He showed me how businesses were being destroyed and people were losing their jobs because they would not participate in what violated their conscience. It was not enough for the nation to allow these things. The nation was forcing everyone to celebrate them. The compulsion was the point. It was not sufficient to merely tolerate. Affirmation was demanded. Participation was required, and those who refused to comply faced consequences that were designed to be severe enough to silence the rest. The angel showed me teachers who had lost their positions because they spoke about traditional views of family. He showed me business owners whose companies were destroyed because they would not participate in things that violated their faith. He showed me healthcare workers facing impossible choices. He showed me young people being pressured to affirm things that conflicted with what their parents and their faith had taught them. The system was not neutral. The system was actively working against those who held to biblical truth. And the machine of enforcement was efficient. It had been built carefully over time, and it was now operating with considerable power. Third, the angel showed me how the nation had separated God and his principles from every area of public life. God had been removed from schools, from government buildings, from the public square. Children were growing up without any reference to God's standards. They were being educated in systems that explicitly excluded God and his truth. The foundations of society had been built on God's principles, but those principles were being systematically removed from the institutions that shaped the next generation. What struck me about this removal was how thorough it was. It was not a casual drift. It was a deliberate clearing away. Every trace was being sought out and removed. The intention was total exclusion. He showed me textbooks that taught everything about the world while leaving out any mention of God or his design. He showed me schools where children were not allowed to pray or speak about their faith. He showed me public spaces where religious symbols and messages were removed while secular messages were allowed and encouraged. He showed me a nation that had taken God out of every area where policy was made and decisions were formed, and then pretended to be surprised when the society was breaking down. There was something deeply dishonest about that pretense. The people making these decisions knew what they were removing. They knew what the consequences would be. And yet they continued because the removal of God from the public square was not an accident. It was a goal. The effect of this removal was devastating. Without God's truth at the foundation, everything else was built on sand. The moral foundations that had held the society together were crumbling. Young people were being taught that there was no absolute truth, that everything was relative, that the only rule was to do whatever made you happy as long as it did not hurt anyone else. But that philosophy led to chaos. That philosophy led to broken families, broken lives, and broken communities. I watched the generations grow up under this teaching, and I watched what the fruit of that teaching looked like. It looked like confusion. It looked like emptiness. It looked like young people searching desperately for meaning and finding nothing solid to hold on to. They were being failed by the systems that were supposed to serve them. The third sin was something more subtle but equally destructive. It was the persecution of believers. But it was not the kind of persecution that was obvious and dramatic. It was subtle. It was being done in ways that did not look like persecution on the surface. But the impact was devastating to the faith of the nation. The subtlety was part of what made it so effective. Obvious persecution can produce martyrs. Martyrs can inspire others. Subtle persecution produces something different. It produces shame. It produces silence. It produces a generation of believers who have learned to keep their faith hidden, who have learned that speaking openly about what they believe carries consequences that are not worth bearing. I saw two ways this persecution was being carried out. First, there was a systematic mocking and ridicule of Christian believers in the public sphere. Christians were being portrayed in media, in entertainment, in schools as backwards, ignorant, hateful people. Young people grew up seeing Christians mocked and portrayed negatively. This created a culture where being a Christian became something shameful, something to hide. Believers, especially young believers, felt pressure to keep their faith private or to deny it altogether to fit in with their peers. The portrayal was relentless. It came from every direction. There was no arena of public life where Christians were represented fairly or positively. The image being painted was consistent, and it was deliberate, and it was having exactly the effect it was designed to have. The angel showed me movies and television shows where Christians were always portrayed as the villains or the fools. He showed me comedy shows where making fun of Christian beliefs and believers was encouraged and celebrated. He showed me news coverage that presented Christians in the most negative possible light. He showed me how young people, desperate to fit in and be accepted by their peers, were learning to be ashamed of their faith. Parents were heartbroken, watching their children reject the faith they had tried to teach them because that faith had been mocked and ridiculed so effectively by the culture around them. The shame was a weapon, and it was working. It was working on the children. It was working on the young adults. It was even beginning to work on some of the older believers who were tired of being seen as the enemy, tired of being portrayed as hateful, when they knew that love was at the center of everything they believed. Second, I saw how believers who spoke out about their faith in certain contexts were being threatened with consequences. A business owner who refused to participate in something that violated her faith could lose her business. A teacher who mentioned her Christian beliefs in certain ways could lose her job. A healthcare worker who refused to perform certain procedures could be fired. A student who wrote a paper expressing Christian viewpoints could receive failing grades. The government was not officially banning Christianity, but it was creating a system where living out your faith openly came with serious costs. The costs were designed to be high enough to discourage. They did not need to punish everyone. They only needed to punish enough people publicly that everyone else would understand what the consequences of openness were. The angel showed me families who were divided because someone had lost their job for their faith. He showed me young people who were afraid to speak up in school about what they believed because they knew they would be attacked by teachers and classmates. He showed me healthcare workers who faced impossible choices between their conscience and their livelihood. The persecution was real, even though it was not being done with guns and chains. It was being done with social pressure, with job loss, with ridicule and shame. And in some ways, those tools were more effective than the more obvious tools of persecution because they left no marks that the world could see. There were no dramatic images of believers being arrested. There were just quiet lives being slowly squeezed, quiet voices being slowly silenced. One single wrong word, one statement that did not align with what the culture demanded, and people could lose everything. The system had become a trap. Believers had to choose between their faith and their survival. Many were choosing to hide their faith, to stay silent, to pretend to believe what the culture demanded, even though it violated everything they held sacred. The choosing to hide was its own kind of dying. It was not the death of the body. It was something more gradual. It was the slow suffocation of the spirit, the slow erosion of identity, the slow forgetting of who you were and what you believed and why it mattered. The angel revealed to me that these three sins, working together, had opened doors that should have remained closed. No single one of them alone would have done it. But together, reinforcing each other, building on each other over the span of years and decades, they had created a situation that left the nation exposed in ways it had never been exposed before. Now the devil had access he did not have before. Now evil could penetrate the nation in ways it could not previously. The spiritual protection that had been over America because of the faith of its people and its founding, that protection had been weakened. The doors were open, and what was coming through those doors was not small. It was not contained. It was not something that could be managed or minimized by human effort alone. And now disaster was coming. I saw in a vision what was going to happen in the month of May. A massive wildfire was coming. This was not a normal wildfire. This would be something that grew and spread in ways that defied normal fire behavior. The fire would continue to grow and spread, destroying homes and leaving death in its wake. The fire I was shown was not simply a natural disaster with a spiritual dimension. It was a spiritually energized event wearing the clothes of a natural disaster. That distinction mattered. It explained why normal methods of fighting it would not be enough. The vision was so clear, so real, that I could almost feel the heat. I could see the orange flames reaching up into the sky. I could see the smoke spreading across the land. I could see people running, trying to escape, carrying whatever they could save. The images were not distant and abstract, they were immediate and specific. I could see the expressions on the faces of the people fleeing. I could see the terror in their eyes. I could see the disbelief of people who had lived in their homes for decades, watching those homes disappear into fire in minutes. The leader angel showed me that this situation would go against the strength of the government. All the resources the government could bring to bear would not be enough. The military, the firefighting agencies, all the technology and planning, none of it would be sufficient to stop what was coming. This was not a commentary on the competence of the people involved. The people would try. They would work with everything they had. But they would be working against something that was beyond the natural. You cannot defeat a spiritually empowered disaster with only natural tools. He showed me how the fires would spread faster than anyone expected. He showed me how the weather would turn against the firefighting efforts. He showed me how coordination would break down between different agencies trying to respond. He showed me how resources would run out. He showed me how people would panic and make the situation worse. The government would try, but the government would fail to contain this. The failure would not come from a lack of trying. It would come from the nature of what they were facing. The fire would greatly affect the economy of the nation. Homes would be destroyed. Businesses would burn. Families would lose everything they owned. The financial impact would ripple through the economy. Insurance companies would be overwhelmed. Reconstruction costs would be massive. The economic disruption would affect people far beyond the areas where the fire was burning. The fires would be concentrated in certain regions, but the economic consequences would be felt everywhere. The interconnected nature of the modern economy meant that what happened in one region did not stay in that region. It traveled through supply chains and insurance pools and financial markets until it touched everyone. He showed me how the stock market would react to the disaster. He showed me how insurance rates would climb. He showed me how banks and financial institutions would struggle to manage the claims and losses. He showed me how entire supply chains would be interrupted because the infrastructure had been destroyed. The economic impact would last for years, not just months. Some businesses would never recover. Some families would never rebuild what they lost. The economic wound would take a long time to close, and some of the scars it left would be permanent. The fire would displace enormous numbers of people. Families would have nowhere to go. Their homes would be gone. They would be refugees in their own country. The number of displaced people would be so large that the government would not have the capacity to house them or help them. The shelters would overflow. The resources would run out. The systems that had been designed to handle disasters of a certain size would find themselves completely overwhelmed by a disaster of this scale. He showed me people standing in the ruins of what used to be their homes. He showed me families with children, with elderly people, with all their possessions gone, not knowing where they would sleep that night. He showed me the trauma and shock on people's faces as they realized their life, as they knew it was over. The displacement would be massive and the government would be completely unprepared for it. The people I was shown were not abstractions. They were real. They had real lives before this happened. They had routines and relationships and memories attached to those homes and those communities. And all of that was being taken from them in a matter of hours. Many would become homeless. The homelessness crisis would explode. The number of homeless people would outpower the capacity of the government to deal with it. There would simply be too many people with nowhere to go and no resources to help them. The homeless crisis that already existed in the nation would be dramatically worsened. The systems that were already strained would simply break under the additional weight. He showed me streets filled with tent cities. He showed me families living in their cars in parking lots. He showed me old people and young children trying to survive without shelter. He showed me the disease and the despair that would follow when so many people were forced to live on the streets. The homelessness crisis would become the defining crisis of that season. It would become the image that the nation would carry with it for years. Not just the fire, but what came after the fire. The people left behind. The people falling through the gaps of systems that could not hold them. And I saw something else that made my heart break. Many Christians would be mocked because of this disaster. People would challenge believers to pray to their God and ask him to stop it. "Where is your God now?" they would mock. "If your God is real, why is he allowing this? Why is he not stopping this disaster?" The mockery would be fierce. It would be organized. It would use the disaster as evidence for a conclusion that had already been decided, that God was either not real or did not care. But the people did not understand something crucial. This was not God doing this. This was the hand of the devil. God was allowing judgment to come. Yes, but it was the devil who was carrying out the destruction. God's people would be blamed for what the enemy was doing. Their faith would be attacked and mocked because the nation did not understand the difference between God's judgment and the devil's destruction. The distinction mattered enormously. God had not sent this fire to destroy his people. The devil had seized an opportunity created by open doors and was now walking through those doors with everything he had. He showed me believers being confronted by angry people demanding to know where God was. He showed me social media posts attacking Christians for their faith in the face of the disaster. He showed me how the disaster would be used as a weapon against faith. The mockers would not understand that they were blaming God for what the enemy was doing. They would not understand that the very reason this was happening was because the nation had turned away from God, had closed the doors of his protection by choosing sin, and had left itself exposed. The blame would be placed in exactly the wrong direction. The people who had fought hardest to keep the doors of protection open would be accused of being responsible for the disaster that came through the doors that others had opened. After showing me all of this, the leader angel revealed to me what needed to be done. He told me to plan, to prepare, to alert those who lived in certain locations that danger was coming. He gave me specific regions where the effects would be most severe and most intense. The specificity of what he gave me was not accidental. It was intentional. People in those regions needed to know. They needed time to prepare. They needed time to make decisions that could save their lives and the lives of their families. He revealed that Georgia and Florida would be a particularly hard hit. The fire would be intense in these locations. People living there needed to understand that this disaster was coming to their region. They needed to alert their families. They needed to make plans for evacuation and safety. The angel showed me these states burning with particular ferocity. There was something about the intensity in these states that went beyond the other regions I was shown. The ferocity was concentrated there in a way that was distinct from the broader spread of the disaster. The angel showed me how the flames would spread across Georgia with incredible speed. He showed me families in Florida facing evacuation orders. He showed me the panic and the desperation as people tried to flee. He showed me how the fire would not stop but would continue to advance. These states needed to be prepared now. People living in Georgia and Florida needed to understand that they should begin making evacuation plans. They should gather important documents and valuables. They should think about where they would go if they had to leave suddenly. Preparation was not fear. Preparation was wisdom. The angel was not showing me these things to cause panic, but to give people the gift of time, the gift of readiness, the gift of being able to act instead of simply react. Nebraska and South Dakota would begin to feel the effects as well. As the fire continued to spread, as the smoke spread, as the impacts rippled outward, these states would be affected. People there needed to be ready. The effects they would feel might be different from the effects felt in Georgia and Florida, but they would be real. The ripple of this disaster would not respect geographic boundaries. It would travel through the atmosphere, through the economy, through the social fabric of the nation. The angel showed me how the smoke would drift north and the fire's effects would reach these plain states. He showed me how the economic impact would spread to these regions, even if the fires did not reach them directly. The disruption to the supply chains and the economy would affect everyone. People in Nebraska and South Dakota needed to prepare as well. The preparation might look different than in the southern states, but it was equally necessary. Colorado would also be impacted. The fire and its consequences would reach into Colorado. People there should be prepared. Colorado had known fires before. But what the angel showed me coming was beyond the experience of what had come before. The scale was different. The ferocity was different. The spiritual dimension behind it made it different from anything the state had previously faced. The angel showed me Colorado burning as well. He showed me the fires advancing across the western states. He showed me how the western region of the nation would be most severely impacted by this disaster. People in Colorado needed to understand that their state would be affected. The preparations that applied to the other states applied here too. Documents, valuables, evacuation plans, knowledge of where to go and how to get there, and then North Carolina, Montana, and North Dakota, all these regions needed to be ready. The disaster would touch all of them. Each state carried its own particular vulnerability, its own particular way that the disaster would reach it, but none of them would be untouched. The angel showed me each of these states with the same seriousness, the same urgency, the same instruction to prepare. The angel showed me how the disaster would spread across the nation. Not all the damage would come from direct fire, but all the regions would feel the effects. The disruption would reach from the West Coast to the East Coast. No part of the nation would be completely untouched. The impact would be nationwide. Even those who never saw a flame, who never smelled smoke, would feel the consequences of what was coming through their bank accounts, their supply chains, their communities, their families. The leader angel showed me that if not for God's mercy, the fires would not stop. The nation would be completely consumed. The entire country would crumble under the weight of what was coming. But God's mercy was available. His mercy could limit the damage. His mercy could protect certain areas. His mercy could save lives. But His mercy would only be extended in response to prayer, in response to intercession, in response to believers crying out to God. The mercy was not automatic. It was not unconditional in the sense that it would flow regardless of what the people did. It was waiting. It was ready. But it was waiting for the people to call on it. He showed me how different the outcome could be if the church rose up and prayed. He showed me how the fires could be limited. He showed me how lives could be saved. He showed me how the nation could be spared from the complete destruction that was otherwise coming. But it all depended on prayer. It all depended on believers interceding. The two outcomes the angel showed me were not close together. They were dramatically, vastly different from each other. The difference between a nation consumed and a nation that survived was prayer. That was the variable. That was the hinge on which everything turned. The angel called on intercessors to rise up. He told me that the guardian angels of America could not do this alone. They needed partners on the earth. They needed believers who would pray. They needed people who would intercede for the nation. If the intercessors would rise up and pray, if they would partner with the guardian angels, then the borders of the nation could be secured. The judgment could be limited. The mercy of God could be extended. The angels were ready. They had taken their positions. They were braced and waiting. But they were waiting for something from the earth. They were waiting for the sound of prayer rising up to heaven. He showed me how prayer worked. He showed me how, when believers prayed, it opened doors in the spiritual realm that were otherwise closed. He showed me how the prayers of the saints rose up like incense before God. He showed me how those prayers gave the angels permission to act. He showed me how the more believers prayed, the more the angels could do to protect the nation. Prayer was not simply a spiritual exercise that made the person praying feel better. Prayer was a mechanism of real power. Prayer changed the spiritual landscape. Prayer shifted what was possible. Prayer opened doors that were closed and closed doors that were open. Prayer was the language through which human beings partnered with heaven in the affairs of the earth. The angel made it clear that prayer was not a small thing. Prayer was power. Prayer was the mechanism through which heaven and earth connected. Prayer allowed believers to partner with God in His work. When believers prayed, things changed. The spiritual warfare shifted. The protection increased. The mercy flowed. Every prayer mattered. Every voice that was raised mattered. Every intercessor who took their place mattered. The 32 guardian angels were positioned and ready, but they needed the church. They needed the intercessors. They needed the people of God to rise up and take seriously the moment they were living in. This was not a time for silence. This was not a time for comfort or for the pursuit of personal peace at the expense of the nation. This was not a time for believers to be passive or to assume that someone else would handle it. This was a time for prayer. The guardians of the nation were ready. They were positioned. They were waiting for the church to join them in intercession. The invitation had been given. The scroll had been read. The vision had been seen. Now the question was, what would be done with what had been revealed? Then I woke up. I came back to my normal consciousness, on my knees in that church sanctuary. The heavens had closed. The angels were no longer visible. The drums were gone. The vision had ended. But everything had changed. I sat there for a long time, just processing what I had seen. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I knew that what I had experienced was real. I knew it with absolute certainty. This was not a dream. This was not my imagination. This was a real encounter with the spiritual world. This was God speaking to me through His angels. And now I was being asked to tell the world. I want to speak directly now to every believer who reads this or hears this message. What I am about to ask you to do is crucial. It is not optional. It is not something nice to do if you have time. It is necessary. It is essential. You need to pray. We are just a few days away from the end of April. The month of May is coming soon. The timeline that the angel showed me begins in May. This is not something far away in the future. This is something that is coming very soon. You may only have days to prepare spiritually, days to seek God's face, days to get your heart right, days to join the intercessors in standing with the guardian angels over this nation. Pray for the nation. Pray for the leadership of the nation. Pray that God's mercy would be extended. Pray that the fires would be limited in their spread and their destruction. Pray for the people in the regions I mentioned. Pray that families would be protected. Pray that lives would be saved. But pray for something deeper too. Pray that America would repent. Pray that the nation would turn back to God. Pray that the principles that the nation was founded upon would be restored. Pray that believers would stand firm in their faith even when they are mocked. Pray that the church would become strong and bold in its witness. The angels are ready. The guardian angels assigned to this nation are positioned and ready to fight. But they are waiting for you. They are waiting for the church to rise up in prayer. They are waiting for intercessors to partner with them. I am telling you this not to create fear, but to create action. Fear without action is just panic. But information combined with prayer and preparation, that creates strength, that creates hope, that creates the possibility that mercy will triumph and lives will be saved. Please take this seriously. Please pray. Please alert the people you love. Please prepare. The time is shorter than you think. The month of April is ending. What comes in May will test this nation and every believer in it. But we serve a God who is faithful. We serve a God who warns his people before judgment comes. We serve a God whose mercy is available for those who seek him. And we have guardian angels who are ready to fight alongside us. It is time for the church to wake up and pray. May God grant you wisdom, courage, and discernment in these days ahead. And may the intercession of the saints reach the throne of God and bring mercy upon this nation.